Shall I start?
Okay, hereby we are starting our webinar. TUMS, Tehran University of Medical Sciences, has designed these webinars since COVID pandemic. It's a great honor for me today that we have outstanding speakers from all over the world. I appreciate all, especially Professor Benzel, an outstanding neurosurgeon. We have all his textbooks in our libraries and have learned so much from great professors. And they are references for our board examinations in our country. I know that all professors have been very busy and they have canceled so many programs. They are all great scientists. And I really appreciate their participation and collaboration. We had so many emails, so many contacts, and kindly all of them were answered. And it's an honor that my great professor, Professor Hussein Khan, has really supported us, and he's present here to help me in moderating this session. So Professor Hussein Khan, you can start. We are waiting to hear your words.
So you want me to share my screen now?
It is an honor and a great privilege for me as a moderator and to preside this webinar in which delegates and our speakers from across the planet are going to do the lecture. This webinar was conducted and arranged through the dedicated collaboration of Tehran University of Medical Sciences, Cleveland Clinic, National Skull-Base Center, Society of the Neurosurgeons, FNS, WFNS. In the first place, I would like to express my profound gratitude to Professor Benzel for having accepted our invitation to join us in this webinar. And for that matter, Professor Alexandrov, Sean Stopes, and Professor Mortazavi, they all cooperated with us, without whose efforts this webinar would not have taken place. I would like to express my thanks to Dr. Jawadi, our dear colleague, who has put great efforts and pains in arranging this webinar in which our delegates would be participating. Arranging this webinar was a highly hectic task and it took lots of pains and efforts in arranging the time and the date for our colleagues in this part of the world and our dear delegates from across the planet. We would be welcoming our initial and the first keynote speaker, Professor Benzel, who is going to give us a talk about the preparation of a neurosurgical manuscript, the way he thinks is right. Professor Benzel, as you know, is a highly acclaimed speaker. He has published innumerable books. As far as I can remember, 10 books, about 375 book chapters, and innumerable publications in world-renowned journals. His masterpiece book is about the biomechanics of spine stabilization and spine surgery, and that we all have in our library as a reference book. Professor Alexandrov is again an eminent personality in the field of neurology, and he has served as the director of the cerebrovascular accidents and neurovascular anatomy. He has also published 3 books, about 250 original papers, and 151 research papers, editorials, and invited papers. Professor Schenstops is professor of anatomy, and he has innumerable publications as far as I could see in Google. He has got about more than 1,000 publications, about 10 books, and about 50 book chapters to his credit. Dr. Mortazavi, an eminent neurosurgeon who has got a special interest in treating complicated tumors of the brain and neurovascular anatomy. Now I would ask and welcome our first speaker, Professor Benzel, to give us a talk. Professor Benzel, you are welcome.
Thank you very much for your kind words. I'm going to share my screen now. As we spoke a bit earlier, I am very pleased to have and honored to have been invited to speak here. It's like I told my wife, I'm heading off to Tehran to give a talk, and here I am. I've been teleported into your environment. So I'm going to talk about manuscript writing, and Dr. Javidi had asked me to focus on ethics, etc. So I'm going to focus on manuscript writing, how to write a manuscript, and then emphasize how we should take care of business by doing what's right. I'm the editor-in-chief of World Neurosurgery. We have tried to take a unique approach to the editorial process by creating various sections for the worldwide neurosurgical. For example, doing more with less, history, socioeconomics, neurogenesis, molecular biology, art. The neurosurgeon's photographs and or artwork is on every cover and spread throughout the journal. And then I'm going to focus on COVID-19. What I really mean by doing more with less is that we deal with many low or middle income countries where resources are few and far between. And this article by Jah is a great article for the worldwide audience of neurosurgeons. He did not have the resources to purchase expensive arachnid. So he goes to a shop and makes them and outlines in his article, World Neurosurgery, how this is accomplished. The first thing is that we should and Blaise Pascal echoed that by saying, I have made this longer than usual because I have no time to make it shorter. The slide is not advancing here. Okay. Manuscript has a title, an abstract, an introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. I use the word subheadings parenthetically under most of the sections because subheadings help the author to compartmentalize bits and pieces of information. It helps one organize thoughts. In a sense, it is like writing an outline and putting various pieces of information in the outline, and then not including other pieces of information that are not relevant to that paragraph. So make an outline with subheadings, first, second, and potentially third degree sections. This causes the information to be compartmentalized. We must remember that the reader is not familiar with the subject we're presenting. So one of our goals as an author of a manuscript should be to make them familiar, but don't waste words. Tell the reader what he or she needs to know, not everything you know. This is one of the biggest problems with junior authors, is that they want to tell the world how smart they are, how much they know. That isn't what the world wants to see. The world wants to know what they need to know. So I'm going to go over each of these sections individually. The title is a sparkling diamond that attracts attention. The abstract is like a short story. It sustains attention. The introduction or hypothesis asks the question, why? The methods section asks the question, how? The results section asks the question, what? The discussion section asks the question, so what? And the conclusion provides a summary. The title shouldn't be too long. It shouldn't be too short. It should have a sparkle to it that attracts attention. The abstract is usually divided into a summary that catches the eye. It is descriptive. It shouldn't be too long. It shouldn't be too short, but it should sustain the attention so that the reader or potential reader will go on to look at the manuscript. As I already stated, the introduction asks the question, why? In this section, we describe the problem, explain why that problem is important, next briefly review what has been done to solve the problem, and finally introduce the study that will be presented in the manuscript by pointing out what is different about it compared to prior research. As I stated, the methods section answers the question, how? Include enough detail so that others can repeat the experiment if they need to, provide relevant details, describe treatments and controls. It should be an easy section to write. Hence, I recommend, and others as well, that one starts here with the methods section when sitting down to write the manuscript. The results section, as I mentioned, asks the question or answers the question, what? State only the results. Comments and explanations belong in the discussion. I'm getting back to the compartmentalization of the information. If you don't compartmentalize subject matter, the manuscript rambles and is much more difficult to read. The results section can be short. Much information can be presented in tables and figures. Do not duplicate data presentation in the text, graph, and tables. Presented in one place and that should suffice. The discussion answers the most important question, so what? It expounds upon the results, points out the importance, compares the results with prior publication. It explains the contradictory results. It discusses statistical significance and chance, if appropriate. Discusses generalizability to other areas. It outlines the limitations of the study and suggests a future line of work, if appropriate. Finally, it sums up with a conclusion, which is not overstated. It is derived from the data presented. I emphasize, it is derived from the data presented and supported by that data. It is rational, it should be rational, and it should be useful or novel. It is not sufficient to present simply a large number of patients. Now, I mentioned in the title here that doing what's right. Plagiarism is common. And it's the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. It can be innocent or malicious. The most common is the innocent type, predominantly in journals that are published in English when author's first language is not English. And so we do, and most journals do, a cross-check on every article, and it may look something like this, where we have text in the manuscript that has been taken verbatim from another source. So this tells us the verbatim text that was taken from another source, and it provides the source for us. Oftentimes there is a 15 to 20% cross-check value, which is not alarming. But when it gets above 25 or 30%, we worry that too many words have been selected from other manuscripts. Now, I'm calling this innocent plagiarism because it is the type of plagiarism where the author is simply seeking good English and a way of writing something without using his or her own words. Here's another example with a 20% cross-check value. So the author may hear from me as the editor with these words. There are many uncited phrases or sentences that are taken from prior publications. This precludes submission for review in its current form. Hence, the manuscript is rejected pre-review. The authors are encouraged to rewrite in their own words with English editorial assistance and resubmit to World Neurosurgery or elsewhere with English editorial assistance. Most of the time, this is available to physicians. I find that with World Neurosurgery, the greatest number of articles submitted are from China. And if the manuscript is sent back with this admonition, more often than not, the authors can find English editorial assistance. And it seems to work out fairly well, but it's odd that they must be reminded to seek it. Many problems with coming from authors whose initial language is not English are usage errors, grammar errors, and errors of syntax. Grammar is anything that has to do with sentences, punctuations, or the correct ways to write or speak a language. Usage is the way in which words or phrases are actually used, spoken, or written in a speech community. And syntax is the way in which linguistic elements such as words are put together to form constituents such as phrases or clauses. I spent some time in Novosibirsk, Russia, which is in the far eastern region of Russia. I came to understand that the problem that these people were having with publishing in English journals was they were using English words and writing with Russian sentence structure. So the authors need to understand the differences of sentence structure in English compared to Russian, for example. The editorial assistance is mandatory here, and practice makes perfect. There are 3 books that may be worth reading. One of them is Strunk and White on the Elements of Style. It is a little book, and it basically provides the rules for English writing. Some of you may be aware of Stephen King, who is a novelist who's written many, many novels, but he also wrote this book on writing. Reading that book gives one a lot of insight into how to transfer information from your brain into the computer or onto the paper. And then perhaps the most relevant information that I will talk about this morning is comes from a person, Cormac McCarthy, who wrote No Country for Old Men and other novels, but is most well known for his editorial style. So he wrote and emphasizes these things that I am going to outline with you now regarding writing a manuscript. Use minimalism to achieve clarity. Remove extra words or commas whenever you can. Decide on your paper's theme and 2 or 3 points you want every reader to remember. If something isn't needed to help the reader to understand the main theme, omit it. So you can already see what he's emphasizing is keeping it simple. Limit each paragraph to a single message. That's where those subheadings come in handy. Put only information in that paragraph that pertains to the subject matter of the paragraph. Keep sentences short, simply constructed, and direct. Try to avoid jargon, buzzwords, or overly technical language, and don't use the same word repeatedly. It's boring. Don't over elaborate. Use only an adjective if it's relevant. Don't say the same thing in 3 different ways in a single section. Choose concrete language and examples. When you think you're done, read your work aloud to yourself or a friend. Find a good editor you can trust who will spend real time and thought on your work. Again, read it to yourself aloud. It's amazing how errors or improper writing can be picked up when you actually hear yourself speak the words. Finally, try to write the best version of your paper, the one you like. You can't please an anonymous reader, but you should be able to please yourself. When you make your writing more lively and easier to understand, people will want to invest their time in reading your work. From the journal's perspective, each journal has thresholds. For case reports, they should provide unique information, rare, not uncommon, not just uncommon cases, and unique lessons learned. As of August 1st of this year, however, World Neurosurgery is accepting no more case reports, and they are being sent to INAT for consideration. INAT is a sister journal. The information presented should be of archival value. It's something we should want to be able to come back and review. If you're asked to revise a manuscript, address all comments in the revised manuscript, in the text of the manuscript, in red or in track changes. Please don't argue with the reviewer, section editors, or editors. It's a good way to get your manuscript rejected. Be collegial in your dialogue. What if rejected? You should ask yourself, what is my motivation? Is this work worthy of dissemination, truly? Have I optimally prepared the manuscript? If rejected, do I trash it? Do I resubmit or resubmit elsewhere? The bottom line, heed the critiques, take them very seriously, and honestly self-assess. Resubmit, heed the critiques. Ethics. The publication challenges and ethics during the COVID era. Amir asked me to address these, and I think the three major things that editors are concerned about today are plagiarism, conclusion-based research, and peer-reviewed deficiencies. I already talked about innocent versus malicious plagiarism, and how this type of plagiarism is innocent and can be relatively easily rectified. Malicious plagiarism, which is surprisingly not uncommon, maybe 2 manuscripts or more per year come by my computer that have basically stolen information from prior publications. This is intentional, and it is overt plagiarism, and it is the practice of truly taking someone else's work or ideas and passing it off as its own. Conclusion-based research or hypothesis-based research is risky business, particularly for surgical clinical trials. This fellow, David Casseret, wrote a great article in the New England Journal of Medicine in March of 2016 called The Therapeutic Illusion and the Illusion of Control. He basically talks about how we can convince ourselves of the value of an outcome when indeed it's not true. Once a treatment is underway, physicians and patients tend to look for evidence that it is having some kind of a positive effect, and in fact don't look for the negative effect. This therapeutic illusion leads to confirmation bias. Conclusion-based research or hypothesis-driven research basically is designed to prove a point. So bias enters the fray significantly there, as opposed to process-based research or exploratory inquiry, where the author seeks to find the truth. So conclusion-based research utilizes frequentist probability. Process-based research uses Bayesian probability. We know, and there's a growing body of knowledge, that many research findings which are published are subsequently proven to be wrong. That's false findings. The truth wears off. There's a growing number of these articles. Many of you may be familiar with Scott's parabola, where technology or a subject matter finds significant interest. People write papers and it becomes widely utilized. And then some other authors look at it, try to reproduce the results. They can't, they find more and more problems with it, and the technology dies. A lot of patients may be hurt in this interval, and significant costs may be realized. A little bit about the peer review process. Amir asked me to these words. He said, since there have been hundreds and perhaps thousands of publications in renowned journals about COVID-19, and many have been published without having undergone peer review, we would like to give you to give a short lecture whether the current trend of such publications is aligned with international standards of writing or not. So since February or March, and as of August 28th, World Neurosurgery accepted 146 COVID-related papers. It rejected 109, with one was withdrawn, and 29 are currently under review. All were peer-reviewed. Manuscripts are peer-reviewed Letters to the editor are only reviewed by the editor. That's me for World Neurosurgery. So to clarify, what is meant by an expedited review? There are two components to the review process. One is the editorial peer review process, where the manuscript comes in, it is distributed to a section editor who distributes it to reviewers, who then provide the information that is provided to me to make the ultimate decision about the manuscript. That is not altered with World Neurosurgery, at least, with the expedited review. What is altered under the expedited review, which we used for a couple of months during the COVID-19 crisis, what is altered, is the production process. We streamline that, and it is shortened for the expedited review, so that peer review process is unchanged. The production process is sped up. So we must clearly define peer review, and it's mandatory. People will ask me to reverse a decision about their manuscript. And of course, everybody thinks when they write a manuscript that it is world class and it needs to be published, when in reality, we reject overall nearly 80% of manuscripts submitted to World Neurosurgery. This is becoming a greater and greater number. But I say, no, I can't. You're welcome to resubmit, rewrite and resubmit, but the sanctity of the peer review process must be maintained. As I said, all authors feel that their manuscript is worthy of publication. Unfortunately, only 20 some odd % are published, and hence they often disagree. I thank you very much. I will entertain questions either now or later, and I turn it back to you. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Dear Professor Benzel, thank you so much for your nice speech. Of course, we learned so much, and we are always learning. I had contribution with World Neurosurgery and with WFNS since more than 10 years ago. Of course, I have publications. Every neurosurgeon has a desire to have publication in World Neurosurgery. I have been rejected so many times and accepted sometimes by your esteemed journal. Thank you for the nice speech.
I'm sorry.
You're welcome. It indicates actually the high impact of the journal. Now I wanted to ask to our participants if they have any comments or questions. We really want our participants to share in discussion and ask their questions from Professor Benzel. Otherwise, I have so many questions. Participants can raise their hand if they have any questions. I'll activate their microphone, or they can write in the chat room. I can transfer it to Professor Benzel. Professor Benzel, maybe if you let me, I ask the first question. That's always a question for me, that why do we have special author instructions for every journal, for each journal? As a reviewer and also as an author, it's always sometimes difficult to provide all instructions for providing a paper. These instructions looks like a signature for every journal or for the publication company. But do you think it is valuable to have a more modified instruction for authors?
Yeah, that probably would be valuable, but every journal is different. They have a different audience. So I often present with Jim Rutka from Journal of Neurosurgery and Nelson Oyuseku from Neurosurgery, and their focus is quite different than World Neurosurgery. They would not publish an article on doing more with less, for example. So it'd be, although your thoughts are great, you're basically asking for a universal instruction for authors, and I don't think you'd get all the journals to go along with it. So I think although it's a wonderful gesture and idea, it's probably not doable. But to be honest with you, next time I get on the podium with these folks, I'm going to ask them that question, because I think it's a very good question.
Thank you, Professor. Sometimes, for example, references styles. We have very different styles for references.
Yes.
Of course, that problem is solved to some extent according to EndNote and Citation Manager. But it's really a question for me that why should be that much different styles for references? What do you think about it?
So ask the question one more time, I'm sorry.
About references that are provided in every paper, we have different styles. For every journal, instructions include different styles for providing or preparing references. And sometimes that's problematic. I know that we have to prepare from the beginning, for example, a paper for board neurosurgery or for JNS. From the beginning, we should meet instructions. But sometimes we have to change for example, the paper rejected, we have to send it for another journal. And these different styles of references are sometimes they are really difficult to make the instructions of another journal and change it. They are just sometimes semicolons or commas or something like it. I want to know about the philosophy of such differences in instructions.
All I can say is
it's like a signature for every journal to have.
Yeah, you need to. It is what it is. I can't change that. I think we are probably less strict with World Neurosurgery than, say, other journals like Europe, Journal of Neurosurgery or Neurosurgery. So I'm not picky, okay, as an editor, but still, you need to change the format for each journal, and it's a problem, and it's not going to go away for you. I'm sorry to say, but like I said, I am going to pursue this and see if we can come up with some sort of international, or at least a neurosurgical publication group policy on this.
Thank you very much, dear Professor. We will be happy if our participants would like to take part in our discussion and give their comments or their questions. Okay, Professor Hussein Khan. Please, Professor Hussein Khan.
Thank you, Professor Benzel, for your elegant talk. I enjoyed it. And I would take your practical ideas with me when I'm back to office and writing a manuscript. I'll keep all those points that you have referred to in writing a good manuscript. I thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
I have a commentary about this, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah. So in respect to writing two things, plagiarism and case reports. So I have had this problem with junior authors, and they, we have, our team is that the most junior sometimes does a literature search on the subject, and then writes a blog introduction. And I think it's a little bit difficult for them to, in the beginning, depending on the experience with publication, to understand how to cite something important in respect to introduction, or when you compare results with previous result, unless the report is completely novel, and say, let's say, aneurysm. So in 1976, Yashargil did this, and et cetera, et cetera. And so sometimes they just go and obviously put a copy of the conclusion there. And obviously the programs cross-check, as you showed very well. And also, and it looks like a plagiarism. So I think a simple thing is that, except for a few number of people that really intentionally do this, I think the majority, as you mentioned, just do it unwillingly. So if there is a statement that is absolutely, absolutely crucial, I usually tell them to write Yashargil et al. Or Spetzler et al. Or et cetera, in whatever year said so. Then it comes out of the plagiarism. You just cite somebody and you said, okay, this, I usually have them rephrase and get the content in. So that is one thing that I've seen, that you can go around plagiarism that is completely benign and not intentional. What is your opinion?
Well, yes. I mean, authors do, that's the innocent plagiarism, and citing. So, you know, my message to the author when they are guilty, if you will, of excessive innocent plagiarism is that the words that they used were not cited. But if you said, Yashargil said, quotation mark, and then put what he said in the quotation mark, that wouldn't be cross-checked.
Good point. Yeah, exactly. The other thing about case reports is that, you know, when you write a paper and whatever paper it is, sometimes there is a very interesting case report that has not been published before, or maybe one or two cases have been published throughout the known literature, searchable literature, let's say from 1960 and forward, English speaking. So, and with very high impact journals nowadays, they don't want to have case reports because it lowers the impact factor, et cetera, and their prestige. I have published some case reports that have not been published before, but I usually put them in a different context. For instance, I usually do a systematic review of the matter, and then change the title to a systematic review with an illustrative case report. If it's a surgical thing, which is our profession, I put technical nuances, put a video by it, and many times it's accepted. And when I review case reports, unusually, I usually don't accept case reports unless it is adding to the literature, something that has never been published or something else. So the way we can present a case report is also important. You can put it in the context of a very good, well-performed review with an illustrated case. That's also possible. For instance, I have I operated a few years ago a 28-year-old gentleman with a brainstem ATRT. Okay, so the non-brainstem ATRT in pediatric population probably is 1 in 100,000, even less. So if you go to the adult population, it's 1 in a million. And then if you go to the medulla oblongata with an ATRT, it's probably 1 in 100 million. So then now I'm waiting for a 3-year follow-up this December before I want to publish it, because as a reviewer, I know what the other reviewers are going to say. So how's the patient doing? So, so I'm waiting for this for December. But what the way we have prepared the paper is that it is the systematic review. It starts with ATRT, which is mostly in pediatric population. Then it focuses on how it is in adults. And then once it goes through that, and then we have a video with the explanation of the case. And then in discussion, we discuss, well, what is the differentiation between ATRT and the other ATRT-like tumors, and then location, and then also how it adds to the literature. And I think if something adds to the literature, even case reports, if it's well done and well presented, I think it's publishable.
Well, I think we're going over my time frame, but a case report with a literature review is really a case report. A literature review without a case report is a literature review. And a literature review without mention in the title of a case report, but using the case, a case example, if you will, with the review, would probably be acceptable by world neurosurgery standards. But we're getting away from case reports. Roughly a third of our submissions were case reports. And the reviewers tend to give them higher marks than I would. And it becomes problematic. And it degrades, as you mentioned, degrades impact factor immensely. Henceforth, we made the decision to remove case reports. Besides that, I was sinking in all the publications. In 2015, when I took over World Neurosurgery, there were 1,500 submissions. So far this year, we're at nearly 7,000 with several more months to go. We're on track for 10,000 compared to 1,500 5 years ago. So we simply needed to do something to loosen the belt a little bit.
Thank you.
Sorry, Professor, we have so many questions from our participants. Our colleague have asked, does high rates of self-plagiarism usually preclude the manuscript from getting published by the journal editors?
What was the initial part of the question? Let me first ask, aren't we going over the time? We're supposed to be done at my talk at 18:45, and we're well past that.
Yes, but there are so many questions from our participants. Okay. Maybe I can ask some of them.
Okay, can you read that question again?
Yes. Does high rates of self-plagiarism usually preclude the manuscript from getting published by the journal editors?
What was the word that gets excludes publication?
Self-plagiarism.
High rates of self-plagiarism. Yes.
Well, we can't. Well, the cross-check. I saw somebody raise a question. How do you find out cross-check? Google cross-check, and it can take publications, and it can take you to their website. But it's a service that journals use, and there's a variety of them. But self-plagiarism isn't self-plagiarism if you quote yourself and if you cite yourself. That's simple. And now, if you're using, like you wrote, let's just say an author wrote an article and used verbiage to describe the technique that was used in the methods. And they used those same words for another article on the same subject with different clinical matter. That might show up as cross-check, but we don't go by the absolute number. We go by innocent versus malicious, excessive versus not excessive, trivial versus not trivial. And so it's you know, we try to use a lot of judgment in this decision-making process.
Thank you so much. Dear Professor, there is an important question. Our colleagues, some of our colleagues, a few, have asked that do editors consider the origin of the study when deciding on the manuscript? Of course, it should be not. More clearly, do they consider the country, region, university, name of PI? Of course, for reviewers, everyone knows that they are
Not
a
at
blind
all.
review, but
We don't. There may be some subconscious process going on with people. That's natural because we do not, these are not blinded manuscripts. In other words, we see who wrote it and where they're from. And so, but to my knowledge, that does not play a role in acceptance for publication. And I know for a fact that some very notable, very notable, well-known people have had manuscripts rejected by World Neurosurgery and were quite upset. But I said, hey, the results and the reviews are what they are. So I got to be ready to take a lot of flack when manuscripts are rejected, because again, most authors feel that their manuscript is one of the best in the world.
thank you, Professor. And one of our colleagues have asked if you have written any books about writing manuscripts.
Any what? Any?
Have you published any book with the title of Writing Manuscript about how to write manuscripts?
No, no, I have not. You know, the subject of writing a manuscript is maybe the topic of a half-hour lecture, not the topic of a large book. And I mentioned Strunk and White. That's a good book on the rules of writing.
Thank you, dear Professor. Let me dedicate this certificate of appreciation to Professor Edward C. Benzel for your nice lecture. Of course, you are our professor and all of us are your fellows, but let me to share this certificate of appreciation, and it will be sent also to your email after the webinar is finished. And I should imply that the webinar is being recorded. So our colleagues, all of our colleagues, after finishing the webinar, they can refer to the website. And if they are interested, they can see the whole process of webinar again.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Professor. Okay, now if you let me, we should continue with the next speaker, Professor Hussein Khan. He's our great professor in Tehran University. He's the fellowship. He has the fellowship of neuroanesthesiology and critical care, and he's the moderator of the neuroanesthesiology program in Tehran University. And he's a member of anesthesiology board examination in Iran. Sorry, can you hear me well, or some of colleagues say that I have noise or my voice is not clear?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? So maybe the problem is the internet of others. So Professor Zahid Hussein Khan is the Editor-in-Chief of Archives of Neuroscience. He's the Chairman of Archives of Anesthesiology and Critical Care, an Associate Editor in Acta Medica Iranica, and he's the former Guest Editor of Anesthesia and Analgesia. And we are very honorable to have Professor Zahid Hussein Khan today here, and we are waiting to hear your lecture. Dear Professor Zahid Hussein Khan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jawadi. I'll talk about the first fast-tracked publications and ethical concerns of the COVID era. Now, the coronavirus first emerged in China and then spread and swept the whole world like a hurricane. And this is the worst pandemic that we have to battle in recent history and in recent recorded history. It was an unprecedented health crisis, and we did not see such a crisis since we saw the last Spanish flu in 1918. It caused a significant stress across the globe. There were lockdowns, layoffs, unemployment. The whole economy was in doldrums. Educational institutions all closed. Now the scientists have come up to do experiments and all the needed and relevant studies to get new information. But new information requires time. And clinicians justifiably need new information about this frightening new disease. The lay press has put COVID-19 developments in the spotlight without distinguishing between fake news and solid science. Now, the scholarly journals have the strategy to dramatically accelerate the publication process. The turnaround times have decreased to an average by 49%. And in circumventing long turnaround times, commentators report a sharp increase in the use of preprint servers. On these online printers, authors can download their manuscripts and make them publicly accessible without undergoing any peer review. The main outlets for the dissemination of knowledge are the scholarly journals and preliminary studies and publications on COVID-19 were fast-tracked through the peer review process, and there's no doubt about it. Important findings, opinions experiences seldom undergo the peer review process. Now, there is an unprecedented surge in manuscripts posted on open source platforms related to the pandemic. Now, sharing research data and findings relevant to the novel coronavirus outbreak. And they are available on the website underneath. Now, there is a growing concern about the expedited framework for publications. A great surge in submissions of COVID-19 manuscripts. The New England Journal of Medicine receives up to 40 COVID-19 related publications per day. JAMA receives 235 COVID-19 manuscripts in a single day. And this is an ugly, complicated, and dark side of science. And the coronavirus is bringing it up. Educational team of science, they state, and I quote them, many of the COVID-19 submissions coming to the science family have been rushed and don't meet our standards for publication and broad dissemination. Again, Dr. Ivan Aramsky, Vice President at Reference Site Medscape, says, and I quote him, "You're seeing papers in the world's renowned and leading journals that shouldn't have been accepted or published in the world's worst medical journals." Again, another reviewer gives his own comment, and I quote him, "It is hard to go through the normal academic rigor that it takes to really vet something scientifically." Now, as you all know, and that there were some articles that were retracted, although they were initially published. And the first article was hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine without a macrolide for treatment of COVID-19. It was a multinational registry and it was published in Lancet, but it was retracted later on. Now, in the retraction letter to the Lancet, the authors wrote, and I quote them, "An independent view of the data was not possible because Surgisphere Corporation, which holds the database, would not transfer the full data set, client contracts, and the full ISO audit report to the servers for analysis, as such transfer would violate client agreements and confidentiality requirements." Now, based on this development, the authors state, and I quote them, "We can no longer vouch for the veracity of the primary data sources." Another article that was published in New England Journal of Medicine was also retracted. Cardiovascular disease, drug therapy, mortality in COVID-19. And in the retraction letter to the New England Journal of Medicine, the authors wrote, and I quote them, because all the authors were not granted access to the raw data, and the raw data could not be made available to the third-party auditor, we were unable to validate the primary data sources underlying our article. Now, how to meet the ethical challenges? There are methods to guarantee the quality of the scientific results. Now, self-control of the science process, and this should be exercised by the authors, reviewers, editors, universities, research institutions, and all concerned, so that the science is truly predicted and not challenged in any court of justice. The practical consequences of low-level and incorrect scientific information. That is again, Shapiro and his colleagues, they have referred to it, and it has been a growing concern among the science community. A thorough review obviously obviates the chances of erroneous, fake, and false conclusions coming to the limelight. Publication without peer review can provide erroneous information and also entails false conclusions in public health, response, and patient care, which can be disastrous to say the least. Any kind of experimental medication, since we do not know and nothing is in the offing about the treatment for the coronavirus, any kind of experimental medication may be perceived to be therapeutic interventions. The persons who are going to participate in the study must be told in clear terms about the research project, and they should be given absolute freedom to make an informed consent. The participants should not be lured or enticed to participate in the study for monetary gains, or else there should not be any coercion in this regard. An agreement on data sharing, data access, data ownership, and copyright disputes must be made beforehand. The international review boards should review the proposed studies and maintain an oversight. In facing the current situation, the journal editors have been trying to balance the need for fast and easy access to new knowledge with their commitment to publishing quality data and unbiased results. And they are also striving hard to detect research misconduct and violation of public ethics. Although all the journals have felt particular pressure to publish the COVID-19 papers, but they have also a specific responsibility with regard to this endeavor, that fair and adequate, speedy review at all times must be fair and not speedy. Adequate consultation of experts in the field must be obtained so that the quality of science is maintained. And we should all try to shun expeditious publications if possible. The rush to publish information without adequate peer review has unfortunately led to the publication of studies that ultimately had to be retracted, which is indeed embarrassing to say the least. Retracted coronavirus COVID-19. There are innumerable papers that have been retracted, but initially they were published in renowned journals. And perhaps that was an expedited review. And this is what I had accessed on August 29, 2020. Well, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I wish that the COVID-19, which has affected millions of people around the globe, is vanished once and for all, or there is a vaccine at our hand to tackle this global issue and this pandemic of COVID-19. I thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Professor, for your great speech and lecture. Actually, hereby, I would like to invite our participants to cooperate in discussion. If there's any questions, we would be grateful to hear your comments and your questions.
That was a wonderful talk. This is Ed Benzel. I'd like to emphasize what I mentioned in my talk about an expedited process, in that, at least with world neurosurgery, it means the peer review process is as it always has been. What is expedited is the production process of the manuscript. Once accepted, it is streamlined, and about a month of delay is cut out so that it is published earlier than it would normally have been if it wasn't expedited.
Thank you, dear Professor. There are so many questions regarding the, sorry from the previous speech, regarding the checking plagiarism, manuscript plagiarism. And many of our colleagues from all over the world have asked about is there any good website or good software for checking manuscript plagiarism? Professor Hussein Khan or Professor Benzel?
I know that you can Google cross-check. But you can also Google, and I haven't done this because we already have, and so World Neurosurgery uses the cross-check technology. But there are other ways of checking for plagiarism. I'm not sure if it costs money or not, but I think the best way to gather that information would be to Google it and then pursue it in that way. You can also take a paragraph, copy it, and put it into Google, and it will analyze that paragraph for prior publications of those words. So Google in and of itself is, in a sense, a plagiarism detector, or can be used as such.
Yeah, thank you, dear Professor. Professor Hussein Khan, do you have any comment?
As far as I can gather, plagiarism is an ugly aspect of manuscript writing. Now, either you know something or you don't know. There's no use to get other people's thoughts copied and get them pasted in your manuscript. Well, that's plagiarism. And that amounts to theft even, or broad day robbery. Why should you take others people's manuscript and put them in your own words without taking the due permission? But this is clearly injustice. And all the editors and the chief editors, they should strongly condemn it. If they don't know the language or the mother tongue is not English, then they should take some substantial editorial assessment, as Professor Benzel said, and that would do the job. But plagiarism is altogether condemned, if my colleagues agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Professor. There is a question regarding the language editing. The question is that there is lots of problems about language editing, like prices, especially in Iran. Is there a better way to edit our article language more feasible and cheaper, Professor Hussein Khan? Many of us have problems with language editing because it's not our native language.
A search is made and a good search is made. Even the editors, the chief editors at times, they advocate that you refer to a particular organization who can do the job of editing. Well, that entails some cost also. If you can put the bill or foot the bill, then go ahead with it. Otherwise, you can take help from your own colleagues who have got some control over the language. And for that matter, even in the third world, I have seen that people do take the help of others in writing the manuscript. Even from the subcontinent, even from Japan, from China, since it is not their mother tongue, they have to be helped out if they've got something good to say or something good to provide. Even the chief editors, they should help them if they think that there is solid science behind their manuscripts, and it could be valuable for our audience and readership.
Thank you very much, dear Professor. I should welcome Professor Alexandrov. Welcome, and we are honorable to meet you here. There's an important question regarding open access publication. Of course, it's a very detailed, it is more times very detailed concept, but the question is that we believe that paying money for publication of papers is an injustice for those who are economically poor. What's your opinion, dear Professor? Professor Hussein Khan, Would you please first answer the question?
Can you repeat the question once again?
Because it's about paying money for open access papers, and they are access paying money for poor countries in injustice, especially in poorer countries or in economically poor countries such as Iran.
Well, that is a matter of money and monetary, and I've got nothing to say about that. But if you want to publish your paper online, and if you want to expedite its publication without undergoing that peer review to which Professor Benzel referred, will pay the money and get your paper published and get promoted. Well, that's the thing that everybody does in this part of the world. But you are willing to publish your paper in an esteemed journal or well-renowned journal of the world. In that case, there is no other choice other than that some editors who are good at it, they should help you out. Well, did I answer your question, Dr. Jawadi, or not? Or do you have another question?
Professor. Professor Benzel, do you want to add any more about open access publication and the problems with payment in economically poor countries?
First of all, we offer open access through what we call World Neurosurgery X, and INAP is also an open access journal. The European academic community is moving rapidly towards open access. They encourage, universities by and large are encouraging authors to pay for open access, and the universities are paying for it because it distributes the manuscripts much more widely and makes it free to the world, so to speak. The standard way and this can be looked at as predatory, or it can be looked at as academic, viewed as predatory or viewed as academic. If we don't use open access, which is what World Neurosurgery is, people have to pay a subscription somehow, either individually or through the university or a library, to get access to the material published. Publication houses, publishers such as Elsevier, have to make money somehow. And so either it comes from subscriptions to the manuscript or from pay for publication, if you will, through open access. I think more than likely, moving forward, there will be more and more and more open access publications. But one must be very cognizant of the predatory open access publications, where fly-by-night sites, if you will, encourage you to submit a publication, and then after it's accepted, you receive a fee. Now, Elsevier, you receive a notice to pay a fee before publication. Elsevier has a graded scheme for open access. So authors from lower or middle income countries pay less than authors from high income countries.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear Professor. We have some more questions, I think.
You can go ahead with the question. You've got ample time.
I should imply that we are recording the session and it will be uploaded on our website, and the link of the website is here in our chat room. Okay. Professor Benzel, Professor Hussein Khan has a question from you.
Professor Benzel, regarding open access, I have got a question, and perhaps you're the best person who can answer it. And that is whether the manuscripts published in open access have got the same value as those which are not?
The answer is they are of the same value. There is simply perhaps different audience that sees one manuscript versus the other one, sees an open access versus a regular manuscript. And so the open access manuscript will reach a wider audience. There's no question. But from a value perspective, you know, impact factor, et cetera, it probably makes no difference. However, articles are cited because they're read, and articles that are cited more increase the impact factor. And so open access articles perhaps could receive a greater open impact factor than those, or greater citation rate, excuse me, than those that are not open access. I don't know the answer to that for sure, but that may be a problem. So that's why I think in the future we're heading towards open access as being the dominant form of publication.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear professor. I should mention that we have great guests today. We have Professor Saburi here. He's the director of our neurosurgery board examination from Usefulness University. We are honorable to hear also his comments. And Dr. Ziya, the Vice Chancellor of International Campus of Tehran University, is also present in our webinar. I should imply that our participants, dear participants, may ask their questions through chat box, or they can raise their hands, and I will activate their microphone. So maybe Professor Hussein Khan, we should continue with the next speaker. Thank you so much. Professor Alexandrov, Professor Hussein Khan will introduce him.
Andrei Alexandrov was professor of neurology with a good background and a literary taste, and having worked in cerebrovascular center and having published. Before you were here, I referred to your books. As far as I can remember, there were 3 books, textbooks, that you published, 252 original papers, and 152 research paper, review articles, editorials, or invited papers. Initially, you worked in the cerebrovascular center, and today we are going to listen to your elegant talk. You're welcome, Professor Andrei Alexandrov.
Thank you, Professor Hussein Khan. Appreciate that. You probably saw me wearing a mask. I'm not wearing a mask to Zoom meeting. I'm at work with my team.
Well, I have it in my pocket. I'm scared, and in the United States, but none of you are wearing masks.
Well,
I can see chain tops without a mask. Professor Mortazavi, Professor Benzel, Professor Jawadi, and all of us. Anyway, let's hope that the coronavirus is not here.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So if I guess I have about 20 minutes to talk about how to write an abstract and present at the virtual conference. So my next slide, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see this.
Very good. So throughout the talk, I will give a couple of references that are actually unlocked by the publisher, so you can access those papers. And a while back, the lead professor that organized European Stroke Conference and the editor of the Journal of Cerebrovascular Diseases asked me to write how to write good abstracts, and that was actually an aid that he disseminated to encourage folks to look into resource, how to structure the abstract, how to avoid common mistakes. And so this is the paper published a while back in cerebrovascular diseases, and that's the base of this presentation. So what is an abstract? So you can memorize that by basically saying absolutely straightforward, actual data presentation and interpretation. There's nothing much to it. It doesn't need to be descriptive. It doesn't need to have points for discussion, whatever. It needs to be really, really focused. And so how do you get yourself into that mode? Well, where do you start? So you always should start your research and presentation of research by identifying what is the research question. Why did you do the study? And that essentially determines the first sentence. You should describe what is known in the field and what is this question that you are studying to advance the field. So usually introductions to the abstract are often called background and purpose introduction, and it's a 1 or 2 sentences. You set the stage and you say what you set out to do. And when you think about your research question and how you're going to present it, it usually helps you to determine the title. And the title needs to be dynamic and kind of pointing and exciting the person to actually read through it. Okay? So here is an example of a paper that we published a while back. But actually, my wife is the first author of that paper, and this is how we wrote it. So background: acute stroke patients are routinely positioned with head of bed 30 degrees, despite lack of evidence for increased intracranial pressure. So that's already controversial, right? So therefore, objective was to determine if flat head positioning would improve cerebral blood flow. You say simple things like this, and the person sees, aha, it's a controversy here, and I may gain some practical information. So most of the conferences and journals require structured abstracts. And the kind of abbreviation out there that you may find is endorsed by a lot of these is IMRAD. So what is IMRAD? It's introduction, methods, results, and discussion or conclusion. And before you submit to a conference, you need to look and see if the conference has preferred structured abstracts. And if you have already a journal in mind, for example, World Neurosurgery, look up their website and look up their recommendations for authors, the guidelines, how to write it. And you may find that some journals take only 250-word abstracts, and some may take longer abstracts. So you need to know what you're shooting for. What's the conference is allowing, whether it's a character count or whether it is a total number of words, okay? So when you think about where you're going, so whenever you write something, you don't need to write one part of the abstract independent of the other. You need to have the whole picture in mind. and you need to navigate from your background introduction into subjects and methods, where you describe only subjects and methods. Then you don't put your results into subjects and methods. This is a very common mistake, and it's very confusing. And you don't introduce discussion into those sections. And whenever you write, well, it's always good to write more than you need, because then you would be able to choose what you want to leave and so forth. But you always, when you write, you need to remember rule number 1. I apologize for my French. Cut the crap. So we don't have time to read long things and focus things. You have to really, really cut to the chase, okay, so to speak. So let's see how we wrote methods in this paper. It is a very condensed statement. Look at this. In a repeated measures quasi-experiment design, the effect of the head positioning on the middle cerebral artery mean flow velocity was studied in acute within 24 hours ischemic strokes and measured with transcranial Doppler. So it's a really flowing sentence, condenses everything from the naming the design of the study, what kind of study you did, including the primary endpoint that you are measuring, and in intervention, okay? So that's how you condense. So when you write an abstract, you don't need to write an extensive description of what you did. Remember, it's a condensed version. For example, a statement that this study was IRB approved is almost always not necessary in the abstract, because it is implied when you send your study that you had IRB approval. However, when you write a full manuscript, and if you don't include statement on ethics committee or IRB approval, the reviewer is going to question that. That's a quick mark. So in the methods in the paper, you have to say that you obtained ethics approval. All right, and then results. Well, the results are results. So you have to show how many patients you studied, what are the characteristics of your cohort, okay, so like age, NIH stroke scale score, what were the prime findings? So you just go to your primary finding, which in this case, middle cerebral artery velocity increase with intervention, and you show appropriate statistics. You don't need to write the name of statistical test in the abstract, because sometimes these are too long, but you need to put actual p-value. And for example, typical abbreviations, odds ratio, OR, or hazard ratio, HR, CI, confidence intervals, do not need to spell them. You can just put a standard condensed abbreviation of statistical finding. And at the end, and you don't need to write all your findings, because you may found too much, and you need to choose the key findings that would deliver your message. Detailed findings that's the place for the paper. So when you reach conclusions, the important thing to remember is that you don't need to repeat your data, your findings. Your results are just above it. So in conclusion, you need to give your interpretation of what you found. It should be straightforward, brief, and specific to your current observations. You don't discuss findings by others and your conclusions. That's not necessary. And when I write conclusions, I usually use a couple of sentences. One is the sentence that should open conclusions, our study showed. In fact, that statement should also open your discussion session in the paper. Our study showed, and you should summarize what you saw, but not repeating the data. And then you summarize your main findings, the message there. And second, contains interpretation and puts it into perspective. Now, the common mistake in conclusions, people put last sentence, further research is needed. Well, duh. We never stop doing research. It is a statement that doesn't add to the value of the abstract. So if you want to say that our data become the basis of a prospective clinical trial, that is a different statement. That means you found something that you now want to subject to a prospective interventional study, control trial, and so forth. Or you want to say that our findings are opposite to what is known and independent verification is needed. That is a different statement. That's something that requires confirmation in an independent data sample, okay? But don't say further research is needed. That's just empty. All right, and so our conclusion here was acute ischemic stroke patients may benefit from lower head of the bed positions to promote residual flow to ischemic brain tissue. Very straightforward, and actually this was the pilot data that we are now using in NIH-funded phase 3 study called Zodiac that we're conducting when we randomize patients between flat and 30 degrees on the way to mechanical thrombectomy. All right, so whenever you write an abstract and submit it to the conference and present, the #1 mistake that people make is not to follow the abstract with submission of original paper. In fact, if you look at the ratio of abstracts to the actual papers presented, people studied it in different fields. If people publish about 1/3 of published abstracts as an original papers, that's what we are dealing with. So don't stop at the abstract. And if you worked hard to submit an abstract for the deadline of the conference, do not wait until you present at the conference to start writing paper, because by that time you forgot how you did the study, all the details, God forbid you lost something. So what you need to do is, as soon as you hit submit to the conference, start writing a full paper, okay? Now, the second part of my talk is how to deliver a scientific presentation. So same thing, Professor Michael Henrici and I did this as part of the teaching course, and obviously we prepared that for a in-person conference, but during that conference, during that time, we actually started to use more and more digital tools in presenting, like for example, digital poster session. And so it's not a big difference from what we do in person to what we try to do online, because the tools, for example, a PowerPoint, almost universally used, remain the same, and it's just a matter of how you present, how you arrange your data. So present, how do you present? So let's see, I came up with an acronym here. So first you plan from the start, okay? Place everything in logical sequence. Second, reduce the text and visual aids to bare minimum. Then elucidate or clarify your methods, summarize results, key messages, effectively deliver, note all shortcomings. This is the time for discussion, and at the end, why are you presenting? You present to transform your own and current thinking of others. Okay, that's why I did the study. This is what it means. This is how it should influence where we're going with it. So how do you place presentation in logical sequence? So if you do scuba diving, there is an expression, plan the dive and dive the plan. Because if you go diving deep without a plan, you're going to be lost. And if you're going to get too excited seeing something down there, you deviate from the plan, you will be lost again. So how to make sure that you have a plan? Well, your plan is in your abstract. If you're following IMRED principle, introduction, methods, results, discussion, this is your sequence. That's how you do. You don't flip things. You don't turn things around. You don't present review of the literature half of your presentation. If I hear you talking about other people's work, I lose the interest, because you're doing original presentation. So you should be talking about what you did, not what others did before you. So you need to quickly summarize what is known, maybe show a few key references that you know the literature, but then quickly go to research study question and what were your methods as the result of your research question. And to help you with presentation, particularly poster presentation, if you complete the manuscript, you will full paper, you will have a wealth of places to go, cut and paste, and arrange your a digital poster, for example. Or since you thought out your entire results, you would be then able to say, okay, I just need to show this and this and this and this as bullet points. Okay, All right, so text and visual aids. So in white color, it is what we wrote for in-person presentation, and in yellow, it's what we recommend for virtual. So imagine if you're sitting in a ballroom and you're standing in the back. If you have slides with tiny, tiny font, you would not be able to see anything. In fact, if you come in these mega conventions, unless they have huge displays, it's almost impossible to read and see slides if you're at a distance. In good old days, when we had hard copy slides, we were supposed to look at them like this, at the length of the hand, and read it without magnification. So that would be a good slide, but we're not doing that anymore. So it's digital right now. So think about that your PowerPoint slide should have no more than 10 lines in it of text. If it's more than 10 lines, your font is decreasing and no one can see anything from the distance, okay? So you have to look at your slides using slideshow and see if you can read it without any zoom, without any magnification. So when you present a poster, if you think about in-person presentation, so you have to be standing at your poster, and people are not going to be crowding in front of it. They would be standing about 2 meters around. So if you are standing at your poster and looking at it from 2 meters and you cannot see anything, that means people would not be able to read it, right? So the good news with virtual is that even if you submit a busy poster, people would be able to zoom on it. But zooming usually requires a little bit longer time, and people may get lost between parts of it. So try to see if your poster is also readable in a slideshow format. When you put it on your screen, if you can read it, probably others would be able to. And then use only minimum required text and illustrations. Again, you are not delivering full paper in detail with thousands of words and stuff like this. You are there for just a few minutes, okay? And so in these few minutes, you're just delivering your key messages. However, the brevity should not compromise quality. So how do you determine that? Well, do dry runs. Present your do a presentation to your colleagues, or choose people unfamiliar with your work and see if your presentation would make sense to them. Okay. Okay, and then stick to the limits for specific presentation type. So look up what is the conference requirement. So here is an example of a presentation where you can show a slide that says study methods, and you have bullet points. Our major inclusion criteria were total NIH stroke scale score, presence of a mismatch on MRI, age, and time from onset. That's it. You have 5 lines under the title. Very clear, right? So podium presentations and virtual, live, or these days, a lot of conferences, particularly very tightly scheduled conferences, would require you pre-record your presentation. So you have to fit into the requirement, and usually it's 10 minutes total. Some people can say 10 minutes total presentation, or some conferences would say you have 10 minutes total for talk and questions. So if you blow your time, all 10 minutes of talk, at the end, you will hear no questions. The moderator is going to say, thank you very much. In the interest of time, we have to move on. And you presented and you feel kind of empty because you didn't hear the feedback. So stick to fewer minutes than the total duration of presentation. That would allow you to get some questions. So rule is about 1 minute a slide. If you allocate 1 minute a slide, you only have 8 slides with essential information to present your study. Think about 8 slides. So you have to use the time wisely, be brief, do not read your slides. That's very important. The moment you start reading your slides word to word, you lose the audience, okay? You have to deliver a live presentation. You have to have command of the content. And so on the left side of the slide, you see a proposed 8 slides titles. So when the moderator announces you, in good old days, we would walk to the podium while you're being announced. So you're ready to start right at the when the moderator says, please. So on Zoom, you're obviously ready. And if you noticed, we communicated before I started talk. We kind of checked if everything is connected. So be ready. Do not experience, oh, I don't know how to push that button or that button. That's going to delay. And be ready when moderator announces you that you are there sharing your screen with the title slide, okay? Your second slide are conflicts of interest. And you can get through the first two really quick. You just simply say, thank you, Mr. Chairman or Ms. Chairwoman. I present this study on behalf of my colleagues. That's what you say instead of reading the title of the slide, because moderator already will announce the title of the slide and you as a first author. And then quickly after that, you advance and saying, my conflicts are listed here, and move on. You don't need to read your conflicts altogether because it goes into recording of the meeting. So then you have introduction. Again, brief bullet points, background, state your aim of the study or question. Then you go to methods, and no more than 10 lines per slide. Again, use bullet points and speak fluently over them. Don't read. Results, that's where you slow down and drill to make sure you deliver your key message or messages. Then you go slide number 6, study limitations. Mention, there is almost no such thing as perfect research, so there is always something. And if you don't mention your limitations, you're likely to get a negative comment from the audience saying, oh, you forgot that. But if you mention study limitations, the person would be reluctant to ask a negative question, but instead may start a dialogue with you since you acknowledged your limitations already. Slide number 7, conclusions. That's where you say our study showed and give your message. And slide number 8, acknowledgements. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues. You show a nice picture of your university or your team or whatever you'd like, and that's your closing on a positive note. So what do effective presenters do? They capture audience attention. So when you're doing it live, you look at the audience, you try to reach to different parts of the audience, you constantly move, you don't stand, you don't read, okay? The moment you start reading something, you're losing audience. On Zoom, it is even more difficult because there is no feel for the audience, okay? If you're lucky, you will see some other faces, but if you're speaking at a large virtual conference, you see nobody. So you don't have that feedback. So I'm doing a little bit trick here. That's why I chose to speak in front of the team. So at least I can see how they are ignoring me or not at the moment. Okay, so anyhow, but you need to stay focused, okay? You need to identify key concepts and the relevance of that. So you need to say something practical or something deep or show understanding of the subject and command of literature. All right, so you need to use very clear slides, high quality graphics. So if you're cut and paste from something or if you use PDF, you need to actually increase the zoom into PDF, crop it, and then put it into PowerPoint. That creates a crisp slide. If you just copy something out of PDF, drop it in PowerPoint, resolution is low, people will not appreciate the graphics, okay? Use font size that's readable. Do not put tiny things. Speak clearly to the microphone. Make sure that there are no interruptions, okay? And as I said, it was nice during face-to-face meeting to have eye contact, but you got to anticipate that people are listening to you, and so don't give up and try to be dynamic. All right, note shortcomings, I already mentioned that. Discuss study limitations. Show your own assessment of biases or rank your evidence in a sense, what kind of evidence your study produced. And as I said, if you don't do that, then you're likely to have some criticism and negative questions as the opening comments. All right, and then the final message. So where are you going with it? Well, you want to transform people's thinking as a result of your study. Your conclusions have to address your own current study, not the literature in the past, not the controversy, whatever. You have to say, our study showed, and just focus on this. A discussion, again, bullet points. You don't need to write full sentences on a slide. You need to say, well, it confirms to this, it challenges that, that's your discussion. You make one point at a time, so you don't speak in a very confused, convoluted sentences that bring up different things and no one knows where you're going with it, okay? The way to address that before the conference is our dry runs. Well, Zoom with your friends, Zoom with your colleagues, pick up someone who doesn't know about your research yet, interested in the field. Your presentation is your reward and opportunity. You did research not for nothing, so this is where you show yourself to your colleagues and try to spark new thinking. That's where you're going with this. In fact, I always come from a conference with a bunch of ideas what to do in the future, and that's how you engage yourself in the research and become a productive person. So, and that is my presentation, so I will stop here and I will be happy to entertain questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Alexandrov. It was an elegant talk, very comprehensive, and we learned a lot. Now I would leave it for the audience if there are any questions. Dr. Jawadi, do you have any questions from the audience about the lecture that Professor Alexandrov delivered?
Yes, that's right. Of course.
Some questions asked. I'll initiate. Professor Alexandrov, to write an abstract had always been a challenging task. And I never knew that it was so difficult and so challenging as you presented it. At times we forget these sterling issues, which naturally have a colossal impact on the audience and the readership. Dr. Jawadi, if you have any question from the audience.
Yes, of course, Professor. I have a, of course, that's an interesting topic and challenging topic. I have a question from Professor Alexandrov. Of course, so many questions. The first one is that it's really difficult to write an abstract for a paper. When our experience is more and we write more papers, then we can understand that it's really difficult. For example, shorten an abstract up to just 200 words or 250 words. That's really always a difficult work for me. When I'm resubmitting my paper to another journal after, for example, rejection, or I want to submit it to another journal for any other reason. What's your recommendation so that I can shorten actually the abstract normally in 200 or 250 words, and meanwhile I should preserve and keep the main message of my paper that when every reader or reviewer read the abstract, they can understand the whole paper and the whole process of the study.
All right, thank you for the question. So I'm glad there was discussion of plagiarism before, because in this digital world, it is very easy to cut and paste and create things that way. So you're not doing anything new, yet you just created something. So if you are concerned how to clearly express yourself in a very short space, remember that most research projects that are being done are not flying to the moon for the first time, right? So there is similar approach that someone did, someone published. In fact, the rule of doing research, remember, when you start doing research project, 5 other groups already published it and 10 others are already doing it, okay? So it's hard to be truly a pioneer that no one else has done before. There are some things that happened in the world. So find that paper that impressed you the most as you were setting up for your project. And particularly the papers that are published, the higher impact journals, the better they are, because there is a lot of editing goes into that. In fact, the previous discussion, I can tell you, when I got my paper in New England Journal of Medicine, after all reviews, after everything that was done, after independent statistical review, there was one last review, and that was by English major, okay? And that person corrected my manuscript after everybody else. So there is always going to be something that you can improve. So take these papers that are really, really well produced, see how they did it, and it's not plagiarism. I'm talking about different. Imitation is the best form of flattery. You're not plagiarizing that paper. You're taking how they organize their thoughts and try to follow the same logic. So then you're replacing how they did it with what you did. And when I was writing my paper for New England Journal, I took NINDS RTPA stroke study, put it in front of me, and I tried to achieve the same clarity as they did in that paper. So I had my blueprint in front of me. And then second, for clarity, just stick to the main findings. Don't be afraid to cut things out. In fact, we had just an exercise on that with my residents submitting for the International Stroke Conference. I just told them, yeah, put everything that you want in it, and we will cut it down. And the way you cut it down to the main finding that would support your conclusion.
Thank you very much, dear professor. We have some questions from our participants. Is that right to read your slides word by word?
Absolutely not. Yeah,
absolutely not. Sorry, is that right to read your slides word by word or speak in the words other than your slides? Maybe listen to the words, listen to your words, or they should read the slides. Which one is more correct?
So always speak in your own words. And the common mistakes during presentation is to take a pointer and start underlining every line on your slide and reading it out loud as if you're reading a textbook. That is the sure way of losing audience because people, you need to induce people thinking about what you're doing. And the best way of doing it is speak in your own words and refer to your slides only as an aid and not as a main communicating tool. For example, if you're showing a figure, you need to say, in this figure, on horizontal axis is this, on vertical axis is that, and here is our main finding. So you familiarized the person with what you're showing, you quickly told them what's there, because so they don't need to search your slide and try to understand yourself, and you told them what the figure shows in your own words, okay? The same when you're presenting tables. There is no way you can read the table. So you need to simply say, in this table, we demonstrate statistically significant difference for the following baseline variables that indicate imbalance between the groups. So that's how you quickly summarize and leave the table there for them to see which ones turned out statistically significant. You can also use quick tricks with PowerPoint when you can have fly-ins, lines or boxes to show, this is what I want, this is what I want you to see and memorize. But always speak in your own words, and particularly do not come with a piece of paper and you start to read from the paper without even looking to the slide or to the audience. That's a sure way of losing everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. Exactly true. And the other question is about plagiarism. Up to what % would be accepted by journals?
Say it again, up to?
Up to what percent would be accepted by journals, plagiarism?
As Dr. Benzel said, and I also served as an editor on Open Access Journal, when the paper comes in, big publishers already screen for plagiarism. And you will get a message saying, we found a passage more than 400 words that is word-to-word copy from something else, okay? So there will be some red flag. So if if you think about where the whole notion of plagiarism is, if you want to write a review, you shouldn't just cut and paste big chunks of what others wrote and put it in and put the reference. What you should do, you should say, so-and-so et al., John Smith et al., in their paper or in their study from X number of years, showed the following, and you express their findings in your own words. That's the best way of writing. So if you read the best reviews or editorials, they summarize what others found and lead you to key messages from the key studies, okay? So if you express with your own words, you would never be accused of plagiarism because you're writing your own thing. And you hitting exact the same words of another manuscript, virtually impossible. But if you're doing cut and paste and no edit, that's where you get caught, okay? So that's number one. There is nothing wrong to put a quote from a study, particularly if the quote is striking, or put a passage, but be mindful of that, and then you use quotation marks that you picked a sentence from another's work and you just want to quote them, okay? So you identify that and be very upfront with it.
Thank you very much for your nice answer. And one of our audience has a question. I will activate his microphone.
Hello, Professor. I have a question. Is that necessary to write some details such p-value of or results, or how we analyze data and which tests we use for data analysis? Is that necessary to write these details in our abstract? Thank you.
You're welcome. So if a statistics needs to be mentioned, it needs to be mentioned in the results, okay? For example, if you used linear regression or ANOVA or survival analysis or whatever. Abstracts in general do not have detailed mention of statistical tests, because what abstracts are for, they're for actual absolute numbers and findings. Like, for example, if you are publishing about risk reduction with an intervention, you need to show percent that reached endpoint here, percent reached endpoint in comparison group, and then a p-value. And if you calculated odds ratios, you put OR, so you don't even spell out odds ratios because everyone knows it, or hazard risk, okay, HR. You put CI for confidence intervals, again, abbreviation. And if you put chi-square, you can put chi and then square. So again, you would only lose 2 characters for that. But even that is not necessary, because some statistical tests are obvious. For example, if you're comparing age between 2 groups, well, that's a mean and standard deviation, right? So student t-test, you don't need to do that. You only reserve mentioning of statistics when you did something unusual. For example, 4x6 chi-square. Okay, that's a strange thing, right? Or if you put ANOVA or ANCOVA, again, you're using abbreviation from that your biostatistician gives you, but you don't need to spell the entire analysis of variance and so forth. So the key in abstract is to show absolute difference, absolute numbers, percentages, as opposed to jump right away to relative risk, okay? I want to see absolute numbers. I don't want to know relative risk necessarily right away.
Thank you, dear Professor. I was really surprised when I saw that your H factor is more than 60 and you have a total citation of 13,000. That's like a dream for every scientist. Thank you for your nice lecture. And maybe we shall continue with the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Javadi. I need to apologize for the audience. I am on service, so I need to get back to business. But if any follow-up, I will be happy to. And as I said, the papers that I mentioned, there should be open access on cerebrovascular diseases. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, this is Ed Benzel. I need to leave in about 45 minutes. I'm seeing patients at that time. So I apologize, but that's a hard stop for me.
Shall I continue with the Jawadi?
Okay, Professor. Thank you all for your nice speech. And certificate.
Well, as Professor Alexandrov is going to leave, or perhaps he left already, and you've got Professor Benzel with us for another 45 minutes, as you said. But thank you very much. We have detained you a lot, but nevertheless, we are enjoying your talk and your experience.
Thank you.
Well, shall I introduce the next speaker then? This next speaker is going to be Professor Hussein. He's a great scientist. Sorry, we have an echo of our sound.
Shall I?
I'll do it, Professor. I'll do it.
Mana kena? Dapat. Mana cakap? Mana cakap?
Okay, the next speaker is Professor Hussein. He's a clinical anatomist and professor of neurosurgery and anatomy, and director of surgical anatomy at Tulane School of Medicine. He's an editor for the 41 and 42 editions of Gray's Anatomy, and he's editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Anatomy. He's also a professor of anatomy at St. George University, and Professor Shane Tubbs has published over 1,600 peer-reviewed publications, and he's in editorial board of over 10 anatomical journals, and reviewed more than 100 scientific journals. Professor Shane Tubbs has authored over 20 books and over 50 chapters, and so I think he's famous enough for every neurosurgeon. So we are very happy to have you here, and we are ready to listen to your lecture. Please, Professor Shane Tubbs.
Thank you, Dr. Javadi. That's very kind of you. It's my honor to be here with so many distinguished speakers and moderators. Many of my best friends are Iranian, so I have a very warm place in my heart for your country and countrymen. And hopefully I can add a little bit to the conversation. Can you see my screen now?
Yes. Yes, exactly.
So this is the journal that I'm the editor for. It's a Clinical Anatomy. It's the journal of the American Association of Clinical Anatomists. And as the name implies, we publish anatomical articles that have direct clinical consequence. So this is you know, a niche type journal that publishes in all different disciplines. So from neurosurgery to urology, you name it. So this is the type of articles that, you know, come across my desk on a day-to-day basis. I threw this in not to advertise or try to sell, but one of the questions earlier was a book that either broaches or has direct commentary on how to write in scientific journals. So this is a book we published this year with Wiley, and it's essentially a book that, you know, represents the pathway that someone takes along toward a scientific career. And within it, there are chapters on, you know, the ABCs of writing, the ABCs of communication at research meetings, how to perform research, et cetera, everything from IRB, et cetera. So there are similar books like this on the market. I'll start off with this slide, which is from George Whiteshead. He's a Harvard University author who's very prolific. And his, you know, question was, why publish? And, you know, some publish for fame. That's probably not the best reason to publish, but some do. Some for fortune, you know, in a university setting, as you climb the ladder from assistant to full professor, there's usually salary increases. You may get funding more easily, but this would be included as fortune. Precedence, some people publish to get their name as crossing the finish line first, and that's one reason for pursuing a publication. Responsibility, I think this is where most researchers fall, and it's where I fall, and that's, you know, contributing to science. We're all scientists at heart as academicians, and you give back to society as you push forward our knowledge, no matter how small that knowledge is. And then finally, disseminate your research. So papers are, you know, this is a quote that comes from the same author, but, you know, papers are a central part of research. If your research does not generate papers, it might as well not have been done. That's an oversimplification, but maybe is close to the heart of the matter. So the unfortunate thing is, and we alluded to this earlier, is that most medical schools, most residencies, they don't teach their trainees how to write, how to think like a writer, how to think like a researcher. They often just assume that you already know, and that's a problem with many people. So when I give lectures like this, I try to instill very basic concepts that are intuitive to many, you know, seasoned writers, but to juniors or trainees, they don't think like that. So sometimes just the change in the thinking process can make your writing much better. And I've, you know, put down some things that, you know, I think are important as far as key concepts, easy concepts. And all of these go toward maximizing having your paper published in a journal. So when you choose a journal, you should think about who the audience is. For example, if you want to submit to Dr. Benzel's journal, you don't want to send something that's about urology or orthopedics necessarily. It's a neurosurgical journal. That's the audience. There has to be novelty. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. You know, a review on shunted hydrocephalus is probably not going to go very far. There has to be some slant or twist, novelty to the research or the paper in order to invoke some interest from not only the reviewer, the editors, but the reviewers. Who's the journal's readership? Who reads this? Are these all academicians? Is it a mix of various subspecialties, et cetera? You need to know that. And one reason for that is that the reviewers are going to be drawn from that readership. So you're trying to tailor your publication based on who's going to be reading it. you should look at the journal's history. Remember, we study history for no other reason than, not to recreate mistakes that have been done in the past. So you want to look and see what types of papers have been published, because those were obviously found to be interesting by the editor, found to be interesting by the reviewers, and were published. Make sure you look at the journal's guidelines. Every day we have papers submitted, and I'm sure the other editors on the webinar here would support this, that they'd come in and the authors have obviously not even taken the time to look at the reference style, the formatting, and that doesn't necessarily mean your paper will be rejected, but it, I think, is a cue in to the editor that, you didn't take the time to at least follow the rules. So the basics, I would say, and these are just off the cuff ideas that I think are important when you start to want to maximize your success rate. So you need to know the literature about what you're talking about, backwards and forwards. There needs to be clarity. There needs to be an interest for your topic. And, people often miss this, but your images should be of great quality. Don't send something that's low resolution and blurry, because that takes the editor and reviewers' interest way down, even in the beginning. And then consistency. Use the same font throughout. Use the same type of writing style throughout. Often we'll see papers that have had many authors' hands on the paper, and it comes across as very disjointed, disarticulated, and it is searching for consistency. Some other basics that I would include, these come to mind, is that you should have your paper looked at by colleagues. Let them give you your internal peer review. Before you send it for the formal peer review, let colleagues look at it. Check your data over and over. We often see where the data in the abstract and the results section, they do not match. So make sure you check that. Make sure you have permissions for any type of, for example, figures that you might be using from another source. You should cite and cite. If you want to avoid plagiarism, just cite everything. And that's a rule of thumb. Your abstract, as previous speakers have mentioned, should be concise and to the point. And then the English needs to be very honed. There's a sense by very busy editors when they have a paper where it's difficult to understand the meaning or something's not clear in the results due to just basic grammar issues, they will often kick the paper back to the authors and ask them to fix it. So sometimes it's better to do that, not sometimes, it's always better to do that first versus later. Your revisions, as Dr. Benzel mentioned, should be thoughtful. You should not be inflammatory. You shouldn't take to heart what reviewers say. Sometimes the reviewers come across as being harsh, and that's just a fact of life. Don't take that personally. Take it as constructive criticism, and that will go a long way. So two different pathways I want to introduce to you. So you have to have two perspectives if you want to maximize having your paper accepted by a journal. The first perspective is take yourself out of the position of the writer and become the reviewer. So everything in your paper, when you read it for the last time, read it as if you're reviewing someone else's paper. Be very critical. Does everything make sense? Is it in a logical order? And some things I think that reviewers look for, myself being a reviewer for papers, is the study well designed and well executed, right? That's, I think, common sense. Is it relevant, and does it push our knowledge forward? If it's something that is stagnant and doesn't give us any new insight, then you're going to have a very low chance of having it accepted. Are the results interpreted and are they presented correctly? Are the results speculative or preliminary? That's something to think about, because that's what the reviewer is thinking about. Again, and this emphasizes the second comment, does it contribute to the greater body of scientific knowledge? If it's another review on, I use this just as an example, shunted hydrocephalus, it better have something that's going to push our knowledge forward that clinicians can use in their daily practice. And then finally, is it well-written, clear, and concise language? Those, I think, as a reviewer, you're looking for, because reviewers have very limited time. These are usually busy clinicians. They're looking at your paper in between operative cases. They don't have a long time. They want to see something that's crisp, sharp, and to the point with relevance. The other pathway that I want to introduce you to is when you've read your paper, not as an author, not as a reviewer, read your paper as an editor. And you're going to say, well, I've never been an editor. Well, try to think like an editor's shoe, put yourself in their shoes. They're looking out for the greater good of the journal, and they want to publish cutting edge material that's relevant to their readership and that's likely to be cited by others. So I think these are some key comments as far as what one as an editor would look for. Does this manuscript fit the journal? So is the topic appropriate? Does it fall within the scope of the journal guidelines? You should always look at the journal guidelines before you write your paper. Is there novelty, importance, interest, clarity? And I love this anonymous reviewer comment. This is from a science paper, but this is a type paper that you would not accept, you know. And the comment is, this is yet another example of a nanoscience paper with nano novelty and nano content. So the reviewers and editors have limited time. We mentioned that. And as Dr. Benzel mentioned earlier, when you're in a busy journal position and you're getting up to 10,000, submissions per year, you better try to catch the attention of the reviewers and editors as quickly as possible, because if you don't do that, your paper is going to end up in a pile of rejections. This is from the editor-in-chief of Or Geology, which has nothing to do with neurosurgery, but it's a great little checklist for what leads to acceptance. And this is from Dr. Cook, but if you look at the blue letters, that spells out acceptance. So attention to details we've mentioned, check and double check your work, consider the reviewer's comments, don't take them to heart personally. Make sure the English is good, the presentation is important, the revision should not be sped through very quickly. It needs to be thoughtful. Acknowledge those that have helped you, make sure there's novelty, critically evaluate your paper, and make sure that all ethical guidelines have been looked at. I'm not going to belabor this. This is a paper we wrote 3 years ago, and it's 4 guidelines for reporting anatomical studies. But if you pull the paper up, it gives you a checklist, and this seems intuitive to people who have been writing for years. It seems intuitive to editors, but believe me, a lot of this is not intuitive to junior writers or trainees. So it's a good step-by-step that spells out exactly what you need to be doing. And this doesn't only apply to anatomical papers. This would apply to basically any scientific paper. So within these 2 tables, you can get a very point-by-point what you need to do, step-by-step, and many authors need that, believe it or not. All right, so the decision comes back after you've sent your paper in to revise, and this is an opportunity that you try to seize. You should be very constructive in your revision letter. Take every point, be thoughtful in the response, do a point-by-point response to both the reviewer and editor comments. This is not an opportunity to be emotional, and we see that on a day-to-day basis. You should be thoughtful. If the comment is a little prickly, then you try to address it in a diplomatic way as best you can. Follow all the guidelines about resubmitting your paper. Now, the other option is that the paper is rejected. So this is not all bad. So you should think of this as the cup being half full. Take that information of why your paper was rejected. Go back to the drawing board. Sometimes you can easily fix the paper and tweak it, have it sent out for additional peer review in another journal. but take advantage of the comments from the editor and the reviewers. These are not meant to be nasty remarks. They're meant to be constructive. And then, you know, if you are willing, roll that up into a new paper and send it somewhere else. So my 3 take-home messages as a writer for many years is don't take reviewer editor comments personally. I have to counsel our residents and fellows and even faculty very frequently who come in my office and they're very upset because their paper has been filled up with red ink of criticism, and they take it too personally. I have to preach to them, take it very constructively. Quality and novelty will go a long way. You should evaluate the literature, as I mentioned in one of the first slides, and make sure that your paper serves a purpose. If it doesn't serve a purpose, there's no need for it to be published. And then finally, as a writer, I would emphasize perseverance. Not only once, but 3 times. Take constructive criticism, rebuild your paper with a revision, or rebuild your paper and submit elsewhere. Don't feel like you failed if the paper is rejected outright. Sometimes there's another journal that is a better home for such a publication. Thank you very much for your attention and staying up late in Tehran. I appreciate it. And I look forward to any comments you might have.
Thank you, Professor TUMS.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for a nice lecture, Mr. Professor Hussein Khan. We are waiting to.
Thank you, Professor. I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
And
Thank
it
you.
was a learned talk from a well-experienced writer, a prolific writer. And I think you've got more than 1,000, perhaps nearing 2,000 original papers to your credit, innumerable books that you have published. And it was nice to see you. You've got evening over here, almost getting 8:30, 8:45, and you've got mornings. So I wish you a good day and a good morning again.
Thank you.
Well, I leave it for the audience if they've got any questions to ask. And then I would dictate them to you for your answers.
My pleasure.
Jordi, do you have any questions from the audience? We've got 2 audiences, one across the planet and one in this part of the world. You can choose anyone. Are you looking?
I'm looking if there's any questions from the audience.
So by the time you look, I'll just... Professor Chinstops, long back when I was a new faculty member, I would get offended when I would read some critical remarks about my manuscript that I had submitted. And that it took time, perhaps, that being young, you don't want anybody to raise his fingers at you. But as you get older, you know that things have to be corrected as they are asked. I think it was the same with you when you were younger. Is it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We all learn from our mistakes.
I would call our next speaker, Dr. Jawadi. He holds a PhD degree in neuroscience, and his fellowship he got in cranial-based surgery. He's a nice colleague, and as he told me that we have submitted a few papers, manuscripts, to the World Journal of Neurosurgery, and some of them got rejected. Well, that's the way of life. We don't have to take it seriously, and we have to avail of those remarks that the honorable reviewers have put again and put it to another. Give it to, submit it to another journal. Well, Dr. Jawadi is going to touch and dwell on an issue, a very controversial issue. Perhaps that would raise many questions. Something about the scientific index, the impact factor, and its impact on the publications, the promotions that we get, and perhaps many other things that he would dwell upon. Dr. Jawadi, you're most welcome.
Can you see my slide clearly? Yes, I should appreciate Professor TUMS. He was busy and he wanted to lift us. And I appreciate Professor Benzel and Professor Mortazavi. They have joined us from beginning, and I'm really honored. It's really a great honor for me to present my lecture. It's about the real value of scientific indices in publication. If we take a look at the history of scientific writing, the first scientific journals were published in 1665 in France and England. And prior to mid-20th century, peer review was not always necessary. And after that time, it became necessary, and therefore peer review seemed like the first ranking process that every author will meet. So ranking is important, but how do we rank the importance of a journal or the journal's value to the readers? How do we rank papers, and how do we rank researchers? There's really a great interest for these types of rankings. The goal of scientific writing would be actual observations, and therefore works, we should cite the earlier works, and the citation would be a basis. Cite the earlier works, and this citation would be a basis for ranking. Therefore, scientific, what's the real indices? And now we want another read, machine learning indices, and now another read, internet connection to answer.
Well, we have got some internet connection problem at the moment. Meanwhile, I avail of this opportunity to express my profound gratitude to Tehran University of Medical Sciences, who collaborated and showed a great dedication in arranging this webinar.
This is Ed Benzel. I am sorry, but I need to sign off at this point. I have a patient waiting for me. I would like to take this moment to thank everyone so much for inviting me. I am really sorry that I'm going to miss Dr. Javidi's talk. We have been communicating extensively, and I've really enjoyed his willingness to help arrange this for me. And I thank you all. I really do thank the previous speakers because they have been fantastic. And I look forward to future interactions. Amir, I'm sorry, I'm going to miss your talk. We'll communicate, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me now clearly?
Yes.
So we have different kinds of scientific indices, and there are lots of questions and challenges. What's the validity of this ranking? Does it include interests of readers? And does it indicate the inherent quality of articles? Should impact factors be used for individual ranking of researchers? And what's the usefulness or reliability of findings in cited items? And could there be any modifications? We have a great dilemma that all of us want to have publications in reputed journals. And that's the criteria which is used to evaluate the quality of the researcher. For the first question, considering interest of readers, actually academic scientists may have different interests than a physician caring for patients. The current situation, I mean, coronavirus pandemic is a good example. During coronavirus pandemic, we have lots of case reports or small stories. And should we say that these case observations are not of great significance just because they are case reports? And should we wait for vaccine to be developed or for an RCT to validate our observations? Of course, that would not be reasonable because we are missing time, and for saving life of patients, we need every small piece of information. Of course, if we consider level of evidence, case reports may be called anecdotes from unusual observations, but they are actual records of experience and observations. And normally the science doesn't come from RCT. And so case reports have their own significance. And regarding the inherent nature of any paper, there is a nice analysis. It has been done between the correlation between impact factor-based journal rank and future citations. The authors have collected the data from 1902 to 2009, and impact factor, of course, was introduced after 1960s, and before that, it was computed retroactively. If you take a look at this figure, the horizontal axis indicates the years, and the vertical axis indicates the coefficient of determination, which is impact factor divided by citations. And we have two very informative trends. If you see at 1960s, we have a rapid increase in citations, which is due to the introduction of impact factor, the concept of impact factor. And again, we have a significant increase at 1990s, which is due to introduction of internet. So it indicates that data supports that reading habits may drive the correlation between journal rank and citations. And it's not only the inherent quality of papers. Regarding the third question, whether all papers published in high-ranked journals are superior in quality or not. Of course, Nature is an interdisciplinary scientific journal. But we should consider impact factor. It was introduced by Garfield, and usually we use two-year impact factor, and it indicates the ratio of citations received per paper during preceding 2 years. But there are several criticisms regarding impact factor. It's the mean of data, it's a mean value. It has no normal distribution. Actually, if we consider the citation counts, impact factor indicates an skew distribution. For example, for Nature journal, the blue line, you can see that most of the papers have low number of citations, and just a few papers with high citations, less than 1/4 of accepted papers, would increase the impact factor of this journal. Therefore, we should consider citable items. Journals are interested to publish citable items, which can gather or attract citations. And this has a very significant effect on behavior of editors. They may interest in publishing review articles, may force authors to add self-citations. They may decline publication of papers which are unlikely to be cited, or may publish papers that are expected to have highly citation number. Therefore, I introduced modified impact factor at 2016, and I published it in the Journal of Neurosurgical Sciences to indicate the real scientific value of a journal in its own field, in a specific field. The question was that if you publish a paper in a high-ranked journal, for example in Nature, and the paper is about neurosurgery, does it indicate greater scientific value than a similar paper published in a surgical-related journal such as World Neurosurgery? Modified impact factor is defined as impact factor divided by impact factor of the highest ranking journal in that field multiplied by 100. For example, if we consider JNMP as the highest impact factor in the field of neurosurgery, which is 8, JNS impact factor is 4, and the World Neurosurgery is 1.7. Therefore, the modified impact factor, which should be used as a complementary index, would be 100 for JNMP, 50 for JNS, and 20 for World Neurosurgery. And this indicates the significance of the journal in that specific field. We have exactly the same problem with H-index because it's used to evaluate the papers and individual researchers, which is introduced by Professor Hirsch, but it doesn't show the entire scientific labor of a person, including the number of publications and total amount of citations. So we introduced scientific index, which is multiplication of number of papers in number of total citations divided by 1,000. If you take a look at Google Scholar, you can see all of these data provided there. Number of articles, papers, number of total citations, but they have no role in H-index. Therefore, in this way, we can reach a new complementary index. For example, at this table, there are real persons. We have 3 scientists with H-index of 9, but with different number of publications and different total citation numbers. And this scientific index could actually differentiate between these guys. The one with more scientific labor has SI of 47, and one of them has 8.8. So it can differentiate between researchers as a complementary factor beside H-index. Also, we introduced the real scientific index with Professor Hussein, which is a more complicated index using scorings for authorships, type of papers, the rank of authors, and I'm not going through details. So that's really a challenging, a real challenge in my country, in scientific festivals, which are used for ranking scientists, institutes, giving grants and prizes. Interestingly, we are asked to, for example, the best researchers would be those with papers in journals with impact factor more than 20, more than 30 citations in a year. And this is not achievable for surgical journals because in neurosurgery, we don't have any journal with impact factor more than, for example, 8. And they are not equal to pharmacology. So indices are used in appropriate places. Impact factor, which is used for ranking journals, is used for ranking researchers or for ranking papers and institutes. So what's the role of readership and usefulness? When we are submitting a manuscript, of course, we should consider the readership and not the impact factor. How much the paper is useful and how much is the acceptability of the paper. There's a nice paper recently published in Surgical Neurology International by Professor Osman. And they compared between 9 neurosurgery journals. They considered digital indices, scientific indices, and also readers per month or users per month. And they compared it to the ranking of various indices. These are the 8 journals. You can see JNS, Neurosurgery, Surgical Neurology International, ACTA, and other journals. And they found that there was a major difference between the index indicated by readers or user per month with the ranking with citation indices. And therefore, we should imply that transmission of information and the value of readers is much more important than ranking with just scientific indices. Because the people, the scientists or the physicians are going to read the papers to achieve information. In another unpublished data in surgical neurology, they found that talking with colleagues was even more popular and had a higher rank than CME courses or reading complete journals for physicians. Because there are different interests for academicians, and for a physician who is going to learn something to care for the patient. There are also other effects of journal rank. There are dark ideas. For example, some claim that journal rank is expensive, delays science, frustrate researchers, or even it can violate the most basic scientific standards. But actually, the ranking of journals is important, and we cannot neglect it. While submitting a paper for a journal, the most consideration should be readership and not just the impact factor, because we want to achieve our goal in scientific writing, and the goal is transmission of information and communicate our observations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jawadi. It was a very good and comprehensive talk about the various indices of ranking prevailing in this part of the world and across the planet. Now, personally, I would ask you a question. Now, which one would you prefer? Impact factor, the real scientific index, or the modified impact factor as far as ranking of the journals and promotions of researchers is concerned?
Thank you, dear professor, for your nice question. Actually, each index has its own value and its own role. And the most important point is that we should understand the limitations of each index and the value of each index. And they should not be used in an inappropriate place. For example, we should not use impact factor, which is used for ranking journals, for ranking the researchers, or ranking the papers. And therefore, each index has its own value, and of course, many modifications will be required in future, even for level of evidence.
Issue for which there is no definitive answer. Now, do you have any questions from the audience at the moment before we call our last speaker?
Professor, we don't have any questions from our participants. Maybe you can introduce last speaker.
Well, it's my pleasure, Professor Mortazavi, to welcome you to this webinar. You were here with us right from the beginning, and you're here till the end of the webinar. You hail from this country, so you get many things to say, even if some of the questions are in Persian. They can be answered in your native language as well. So Professor Mortazavi has published more than 100 scientific papers. He worked with Professor Fukushima and Laligam Shekhar, and his interest is in the treatment of intractable or difficult or complicated tumors and vascular lesions of the brain and spinal cord. You are most welcome, Dr. Mortazavi.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. Today we have Dr. Davadi has worked closely with us to have this webinar about publication challenges and ethical issues during the COVID era, together with the University of Tehran. Thank you for arranging everything very smoothly and distinguished guests. So I think all the authors pointed out towards important parts of scientific communication, which is obviously writing a manuscript, arranging an abstract for a meeting, giving a talk, and then eventually, as you go above along the ladder, you become a reviewer and an editor. So that's that. And then somewhere along the line, there is a break point when we continue to publish while we're editors and reviewers. And that's the point that usually the publications are getting, having a highest quality. It is like a Stradivarius violin, you know, he lived 87 years, but the best violins are when he was 40 to 65 years. Why? Because during that time he was younger with good hands. He acquired experience. After being 65, 70, he was more experienced, but his hands were shaky. Same thing with the publications. You learn a lot, and then you learn to look at the publication from a reviewer's perspective, like Professor Top said, and then there is an optimum. So I'm going to divide my talk shortly about writing papers, and then talking about how to present the paper so you have a maximal benefit from the international community to get the information from you. So a few minutes about writing a paper, very shortly. The other speakers pointed out important things. So a knee-jerk reflex for paper is that you look at the paper, you look at the abstract, you jump to the conclusion. So first abstract and title, and jump to the conclusion and say, okay, this is good or bad. So that is the knee-jerk reflex. So I urge our younger colleagues to always look at two very important points. Number one, where the group shows its scientific mind is in the discussion. So you can say, you know, this person did that, I did this, and how is it good or bad? And you always are self-critical, and that is where the strength of the paper comes. The other one that is very important in respect to quality is the methodology. So, and sometimes people don't like to read methodology. They usually think it's the boring segment. Who cares about methodology? But you cannot compare a cucumber with an apple. Obviously, if you want to talk about vegetables, you can put it in the same classification, but cucumber has a different form, might have a different color, etc. So I urge everybody to read methods, because you can even compare two medicines. One is injectable and one is oral, and you just cannot compare them. You just have to have comparisons between multiple factors. So I would like to stop here in respect to papers, because I think it's been a very good discussion about how to write papers, but think about methodology and the discussion. One short word about a distinction between introduction and discussion. Sometimes I see that people somehow mix introduction with discussion. It's sometimes difficult because, you know, you read about the history, the way Professor Javadi mentioned. I usually do that way as well. I have a historical perspective, if there is anything onto the subject in the introduction. And then at the end of it, we explain what we are going to do. We don't then compare the results of the other studies similar to us. That belongs to discussion. And to be honest with you, there is a gray line, which is very difficult to see where to put that segment introduction and the other segment into discussion. So then we take the next step. So we are doing a paper and we want to present it. And usually the audio-visual communication, in my opinion, is very important. So we are going to have a presentation. You stand on the podium, and then you have some text here, and then there are 100 people watching you. So where do you think, or what do you think that the auditorium should look at? Look at me, hear my words, or look at the clicks out of each page? Obviously, this is a problem. And many times over the years, I have put myself on both sides. And especially when you become moderator, you see this problem because you're not giving a talk. At the same time, you are as a kind of a reviewer. And at the same time, you're just auditing this. And so I'm talking, and I like to talk to the people because eye contact is very important. So I want to talk to the people. People look at me, and suddenly the PowerPoint changes, and you don't know what to do. Look at the PowerPoint or look at the speaker. So over time, I had a concern about this, how to have 100% involvement of the people. So after the course, you send them a paper and say, what do you think? What did you learn? My goal is not to just give a talk and walk away. I want to give a talk so people remember. You know, they asked Beethoven, what is the good music and what's the bad music? And he said, a bad music is a music that enters one side's ear and exits the other side's ear. And a good music is a music that enters the ear and comes out in your lips. You whistle the dean, so you remember it. So our goal is to present our results so that people who are listening or watching us will remember that. So that's the takeout. So so I was thinking about that. The second thing is, how do you do so you as an author, as a presenter, as a lecturer, enhance the understanding and what's been provided? So obviously there is a text, and I was just talking about trying to decrease the jumping between the text and the audio. So I added vision, and the people who listen and watch usually remember more. So I went over to making videos of different things, and especially in our specialty, we do a lot of surgery. So over time, right now, for instance, at our institution, we have one person designated to make videos of the surgeries, one person. So you take a 6, 10, 8-hour surgery, and they need to be 6 minutes for just our YouTube channel and 1 minute for Instagram. So this person has a fellowship for 3 years, and then the next person comes at the beginning of the 3rd year, learns, and then the other one goes, and this person comes. So that's about interactive video editing. Now, after I did this, I was giving talks about different subjects, and then you have tables, you have videos and so forth. Then I realized, how can I decrease the time of clicking? So then I decided to simply make the entire presentation as a video, so that I go through this, and then you just click once, it starts, and then I talk, the video moves forward, and that's about it. And why is it important? Because you go to a meeting, you have 12 minutes of talk, and as everybody has encountered this, most of us go over the time, and some people are just okay and they don't use the ring, but at 12 minutes they just make a ring, and then you continue, and at 30 minutes they say you have to stop, and the last thing you want to say is going to be your conclusion, and you miss the fact to communicate your thoughts to the next person. So this one will, the way that I propose, and I have a video about this, is that the video starts, the entire video is exactly as long as the talk is supposed to be. The speaker trains a little bit with our team, so that the way we talk, it's within the time frame. And that's about it. We start, the video goes, all these clicks are inside the video, all the videos within the video of the surgeries are there. And if it's going to be 6 minutes, it's going to be in 6 minutes. So right now, I'm going to start one of the talks I had in January at the US Congress. They gave me 6 minute slots. So it needs to be 6 minutes. I think this is 5 minutes and maybe 30 seconds. And see if I can ask our colleagues at the other side to start my video. And now you can see that the video starts going, and I now explain, so everybody can look at the video and then listen to my voice. So there is not so much of eye movement between different subjects, and people miss it. And also, as Dr. Benzel and Dr. Alexandrov mentioned, you have to know who you're going to look at and what you're going to read. If I'm just going to read what I'm putting on the PowerPoint, I mean, it's going to be confusing. I need to add something. Title is there, everybody can read that. I just add some extra talk so that it simplifies for the colleagues to understand what I'm trying to convey. So is it possible to start the video now? Hello? I can hear you. Okay, so there's, hello? I cannot hear you.
Yes, Dr. Mortazavi.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, right now, yes.
Yes, you can share your video.
I sent it to you. Can you just put it up? Email it.
Yes, I know. I downloaded it here, but actually, I have a problem with the computer.
So you have a problem? Okay,
If it's possible for you to share it, you can do it.
Sure. Give me a second, please.
My computer exploded when I wanted to share your.
No problem. So here you go. Okay. So how do we show it?
I want to share the video.
It's loading. Okay, so Dr. Javadi, I have it on my screen. How do I share it now? Dr. Javadi, I can't hear you.
You have the share content. It's in green.
Share screen.
If you take a look below, you can press share content.
It says
and
share
select
screen.
Yes, and then share, and then select your content, your video, and then again press share.
Gotcha. All right. We can share the Okay, I can't get it working.
Hello there, can I help you?
Yes, I have emailed you. I have emailed this talk yesterday.
Unfortunately, we didn't receive your email, but you can share it if you play it in your player at first, and then when you type on when you share the screen, you can choose your player.
Listen, if I copy, it's a link. It's online. It's an online link. If I put it in here, can you
then play it under your browser and on tap on your browser, and then you can share your browser.
Okay, let me see. Share my browser. I just emailed you the link to the texting.
Computer.
Okay,
I forwarded my computer.
I think my assistant is helping me. I think it's working now. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody sees that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start this, and as I start, I'm going to talk a little bit and leave people to look at important parts. Okay? So obviously here, I don't need to present myself because everybody can read what it says. And so now we're going to go and continue. So we're going to talk about, and this is a type example of a talk. We were trying to make a policy with the Congress about screening for unruptured aneurysms. We need to show that we don't have any economical connections. And then there is a background. This is a intracranial vessels. So I'm talking like I'm talking in a talk, intracranial vessels. We're talking about circular villus. This is the arterial blood flow. We have the intima and the muscular layer. This is how the vessels develop aneurysms. And as you see, animation nowadays is an important part of talks. It's going to take over animation, video, interactive, artificial intelligence. It's going to take over we are facing a new era. So now it shows how the aneurysm ruptures. Now we're going to look and see how the aneurysm ruptures into the brain. It can give subrectal hemorrhage. It can give a hematoma. So this is a background example of what an aneurysm is, what it can do, what happens to the brain. And so now, what are the treatments? Obviously clipping. Now we're going to go through a clipping. So we do a standard craniotomy. This is how the clip is put. So we always have an illustration, which is simple. and then we will have real surgeries. This is coiling, and obviously this is just a standard coiling. Nowadays we have the web device as well, but the goal of today's talk is just about how to make the presentation short and concise. So now this is about unruptured one, and now we're going to look at a ruptured intracranial aneurysm. So we put this is the right giant MCA. This is one of my patients. As you see, it was a giant one. We have the M2s coming off of the neck. And then, so obviously frontal lobe and the superior part is the right-sided approach. And a huge hematoma. We had to evacuate to come here. Fortunately, it was a non-dominant side. One of the M2s was inside the clip, and I needed to open the dome to look at the M2 orifices to make sure I don't close it. And here it is, it's treated, and we are done. So very short and concise. Now we look at risk factors, standard stuff. They're coming, people can read it, and we move forward. Then now we're gonna look here, and the cause of this talk was screening for unruptured aneurysm. So I wanted to show how a ruptured aneurysm looks, how an unruptured looks, what are the numbers, what is the mortality rate. So you have a sense, after 6 minutes, you know what's going on. And then I show the brain of a ruptured, a large aneurysm, bad one, and I show a brain with a good aneurysm. So these are some of the risk factors and some statistics. So obviously, this is something for United States, but I'm pretty sure it's similar in Iran. I think in Japan and Finland, the numbers are higher. I don't know, it's because of better screening or some genetic facts, but this is the numbers in the United States. So the goal of this presentation was to get Congress to get a bill and get the federal system to pay for screening of high-risk groups with CT angiogram. So that's the goal that you want to convey. So then these are the groups, and right now actually we are writing a paper together to submit about this with all the data on it, why everything is kind of backed up with references. So we look at the cost of treatment versus cost of prevention, and it's obvious, but again, our talk is not about this, it's about the difference between how to present it. Now, this is an unruptured aneurysm, and this, as you see, it's a fusiform, saccular, very complex aneurysm with 3 lobes, and as you see here, and very complex aneurysm, very high risk of rupture, but if you do your job properly, you can clip reconstruct the aneurysm, and here you go. And we used the 4 clips and clipped the aneurysms, 3 domes, and let the M2s come off with good flow. And in this one, you don't need to have a proximal control. You have a very good control here. And then usually with clip reconstruction, you need to have special clips, as you see, 90 degrees angled, fenestrated. We also save the frontopolar artery. And this is an intraoperative ICG, and done. So this is 5 minutes and 30 seconds. And then you have references. I always have the references. I think it's better to have references at the end because some people put it at each page. This is one of my fellows who helped me prepare this. He's an expert. And this is a roomy talk that even one man counts. We don't need to do 1,000 smart people, but one man can change the world. That's about it. So can we go back? Okay. Any questions? I can't. Yes.
For your talk and for the video clip that you showed. And I congratulate you for having handled this difficult case. And here is your certificate.
Thank you.
So ask my neurosurgery colleagues if they've got any questions about the aneurysm that you operated upon. Dr. Jawadi, do you have any questions? And is anybody online or not?
Yeah, we have 49 people online.
It had been
Yes, sorry, I had a problem with my computer, so I have to be connected with my smartphone.
Yeah.
Thank you for your nice speech.
Thank you.
That's really interesting way of presentation. I'm looking to find the questions of participants.
Sure. So do you have me? So somebody is asking how we can provide such animations. Do you hear me? Hello? Do you hear me? Yes, okay. So I'm reading the text here so I can follow everybody. So how we can provide such animations? Good question. Good animations are difficult to make and they're costly. So here in the United States, there are different companies that if you want to make an animation from start, it's very costly. What we do is that sometimes companies that we work with give us some part of animations, and sometimes there is actually a few companies in Silicon Valley. They have pre-made animations for brain. For certain skull-based procedure, I was talking to them, they don't have it, and we're working to make it for them. But they have a majority of these standard things available. You pay a license fee, and you can use them. In Iran, I think there is a company in Iran that works with animation. I saw it online. And I think this is an area that probably with Iranian IT technicians and engineers, they're very good. I work with them. They're excellent. And I'm pretty sure that Iran can be, if university can give some tasks to some of these younger, smart people, they can make animations for the universities and it can be dispersed either through university or through the Iranian Board of Neurological Surgery. Any other questions? I'm following the emails, the chat here. All right, no more questions.
Can you hear me now?
If there's a problem with the sound, you can write your questions here and I answer. Here you go.
Sorry, Dr. Mortazari, can you hear me now?
All right.
Yes, we were discussing previously with you about publication of papers or publication of videos. And now we know that many journals are, they have publication as surgical videos, and maybe they are even more useful for neurosurgeon to study such journals. Would you please explain a bit about these types of presentations and publication?
Of course. of course. As you know, we are working on a paper together right now with the University of Tehran and you and Dr. Saburi about aneurysms. This paper happens to be, we wanted to make the paper as a landmark paper, everything you need to know about aneurysm and treatment. I can tell you it's 82 pages, although I lifted out the screening, and I was just having an email from the European Journal of Neurosurgery. They said, we cannot have 80 pages, obviously, either it needs to be an addendum or we need to separate them. So one thing about paper, and I gotta tell you this, I tell you about my own experience and how I see our junior people who go through this path. We have in our team as young as 17-year-old students from the high school who join us. We have actually a medical student in the University of Beheshti in Tehran who's with us, extremely talented. And I like to have international group. And one person that was, okay, one of my other fellows is coming, Dr. Ad. So anyway, if you remember Herbert Oliver Krona at Karolinska Institute in the 60s and 50s, they like to have people from different cultures because he used to say that different cultures add to the value because people think differently. So, one thing that I see with junior people who write and talk is that they want to have as much as possible. And over time, I have learned to convey my information in the shortest possible way. So a typical thing, especially with Middle Eastern culture, is that we want to give long sentences. So they said, how are you? They said, thank you very much. Thank God I'm good. And my mother is good too. And my aunt is good too. So it's half a minute of answer, okay? So, and it's cultural. This is nothing good or bad, it's just cultural. But once you want to convey a scientific information, like what is an aneurysm? I can give you a 10-second answer or a 5-minute answer, but in a publication, you gotta give small, short answers. It's like you're in a court. They go to the court, the judge asks you, what is your name? You cannot just say, my father was this, and my father wanted to name me something else, then my mother didn't like it. So these anecdotes make us understand that a lot of things I've seen with our junior people is that they write long things, and they think they are better because they write long things. A key is to convey your information a short way. That's one thing. Number two is that when you have an organization, everybody does not need to be as good as the other in respect to what we are doing. We need to have a teamwork. So the most junior people, if it's a big paper or research, they do literature search. If there is a clinical or basic science, a few of them do the work. There is a leader who manages how the work is performed. And once everything is done, there is a more senior person that gets the data and writes to provide the results. And then usually the senior author or a corresponding author usually makes the discussion because obviously it needs to have an experience. And as you know, we know a lot of things, facts, and maybe you don't remember, let's say, about aneurysms. Size, location, form, relationship to parental artery. We know these are important. We know that if the aneurysm grows, if usually the neck is towards the dominant side, the dome is towards the non-dominant efferent artery, like an ACOM, usually at the ACOM, the neck is always towards the dominant A1, and the dome is towards the non-dominant A2. We know that. Then as attending, sometimes we don't remember the reference. So usually what I do, and it's very important now. Now we come to the practical things. You have a Word format. I always tell them, whoever that is revising on a daily basis, you got to have a editing system so we know who's doing what. We got to have rename the file and what date and what time and who did this. So if you have a very good paper and 6 or 7 people are involved and they're revising and adding, if you over one day change it 2 times and suddenly somebody is changing a revision that was previous to the last revision, everything is screwed up, okay? So, so we do these managemental things. Everybody is in this position. Everybody who sends it to next person needs to say at what time they did it. And also in the bulk of the email, they need to put key questions. For instance, nowadays, once the bulk is done and I write a discussion, I focus on tables and I focus on illustrations. So tables, they need to be simple. You cannot put 55 different endpoints. You have to put 1 or 2 or 3 endpoints. If you do a meta-analysis, you have to look at what are the common endpoints. Then illustration. You want to do a pterional craniotomy, a simple thing. Okay, illustration, frontotemporal craniotomy, open the sphenoid wing, open it as medial as the superior orbital fissure. That's the typical classical pterional anatomy. I usually do posterolateral orbitotomy. I do extradural enterocleidomaectomy. That is not a pterional anatomy. So like Aristotle said, like Farabi said, you have to just organize what you're gonna do, be able to relate. So paper-wise, one or 2 papers do introduction in terms of the background, historical background. 1 or 2 people do the results. They sit together once a week, and then the main author or senior author writes the discussion. And I have a tendency nowadays to have junior people go and give lectures, because beside the content, once you want to give a lecture, then the differences go a little bit away from what you want to convey, plus your charisma. So you have to start talking and get to the mind of the people who are looking at it. And there are two important things: what that comes out of your mouth and how you look at them. I usually try, now I cannot look into your eyes because of the corona, but I look in the middle of the video. But when I give talks with people, I usually look at most of them so they feel they are important. And then suddenly, you know, somebody falls asleep, and then you look at their eyes, and then they just wake up for the rest of the talk. So, so these are a little bit techniques about keeping it short, convey what you want to say, and look into their eyes and make them feel that they count. It's not that you're going to come and give a presentation just to do it. You're here to say that your presentation is the best thing you have ever done for the human history, okay? This is what we want. So we want to bring the best of the best within the body and mind of all of us. Like, that was the reason I put the Rumi, Molavi, Molana poem at the end, that you can be 1,000, you don't need to be 1,000 people with bad mind. You can be 1 person with a good mind, and that can change the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mortazavi, for your nice speech.
You're welcome.
Dr. Mortazavi, I should also imply that we have many colleagues that they helped for this webinar. There are colleagues that without them it was actually impossible to have such a great event. We have colleagues in international affairs of Tehran University, or IT, our interns, residents. They all helped us to provide such a great webinar and invite our friends, and so that we can communicate information and our science. So Professor Hussein Khan, would you please, we are ready to hear your
thank you very much. Well, we are reaching the end of the webinar. It was in fact a marathon webinar. It almost took 4 hours, and for us, we've been here for the last 5 hours. I'm grateful to the faculty members, to Tehran University of Medical Sciences, International Relations Section, who helped us a lot and who are still online here at 10 p.m. watching this webinar. I'm also grateful to Cleveland Clinic, WFNS, National Skull Base Foundation, California Institute of Neuroscience, who collaborated with us, and we used their logos in our webinar. We could gather celebrities in neurosurgery, neurology, anatomy, and clinical anatomy from the United States of America. In fact, it was a congress and not a webinar. It took almost 4 hours, and it was conducted at the highest esteemed level. Through this podium, I would like to request the International Department of the Tehran University of Medical Sciences, especially Professor Ziai, who helped us a lot to get this webinar CME credit hours. And that is in fact the due that should be given. I am also grateful to the audience in this part of the world and across the Atlantic who watched and shared with us their valuable views about the webinar. Well, Dr. Mortazavi, you're there, and you've got to go to bed, and you will go to work.
Yes.
It was nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
And it was a pleasure to hear to your nice talk. And we would like to hold such webinars in the near future also.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.